Hi everyone, and greetings from Northern Michigan. This is Bob the Science Guy, and today I'd like to set my sights on flat Earth theory as defined by prominent spokesman and recent star of the Netflix documentary Beyond the Curve, Mark Sargent. I'll be looking at his video, Flat Earth Clues, an Introduction, which has more than 1 million views on YouTube. In a recent video by National Geographic, which also featured Mark, a young woman was interviewed early on in the piece. Her words were more than telling. This matters to me. Flat Earth shows you that you are not a mistake. You were created, and so you have meaning. Flat Earth seems to fill a need for many who need to have a meaning in their lives, a sense of purpose. Prior to Flat Earth, many gravitated to conspiracy theories of all sorts, from UFOs to fake moon landings to Bigfoot to the anti-vax movement. Their need for meaning is compounded by a desire to belong, to have a purpose, and to have secret knowledge not possessed by the sheeple. They like to say that they are awake and only search for the truth the rest of us are afraid to find. Let's listen to Mark and his introduction to his video.
This is a Reader's Digest version containing many of the interesting parts of the flat Earth theory. For those who have already started seeing things with new eyes, it will be mostly a recap, but there could be a few new angles you haven't looked at. For the rest of you who are new to this, the first question is invariably, is this a joke? Because it's a joke, right?
The unknown explanation. Right off the bat, Mark suggests that the shape of the Earth is not based on any evidence. It is simply a model promoted by faith. He then goes on to discuss the creation myths of many religions involving the flat Earth. Did many early humans believe the Earth was flat? Perhaps, but understandably so. Early in our history as a species, our understanding of the world around us was very limited. We understood that the seasons repeated, that game migrated at regular intervals. The moon waxed and waned. We saw a flat horizon and realized that if we took to the trees or climbed mountains, we could see further. Our early attempts at reason would lead us to believe that the Earth we saw was flat, and if we traveled to the limits of our territory, the land beyond it looked flat as well. We took comfort in the fact that we could use a stick to draw out the directions to water, to game trails, and even the limits of our domain. Our world could be represented on that smooth and flat patch of sand. Our understanding of the world gave us comfort. Here Mark introduces the secret, the hidden plot by those that shall not be named to hide the truth. His reference to the movie Men in Black is telling. He lays the foundation for the secret organizations that conspire to keep the truth from the rest of us.
And that's where we start, because it's one of our two basic childhood facts. 1 + 1 = 2, and the Earth is a globe. We're taught this before almost everything else, and that right there should give you a clue on how serious this secret is. But for those who have forgotten their history, here's the modified Men in Black version. For the first 4,000 years of our civilization, we believed that the Earth was a flattish disk, surrounded by a solid dome barrier called the firmament. All of the 5 major religions had their own version of this, and the churches enforced the belief.
By the Middle Ages, science and observation began to take precedence over faith and religion in matters of the natural world. Organized attempts to make sense of observations, to make new discoveries, and to develop the scientific method to bring logic and reason to superstition and traditionally created stories, and actually to begin to understand the reasons why the wandering lights in the sky wandered as they did. At first, these pioneers of science were viewed as heretics and suppressed, but then the major religions began to understand that knowledge was power and embraced the coming changes to science. As Mark points out in the introduction, 2 of the first things we are taught is that 1 and 1 are 2. And the Earth is a globe. Rather than being a model chosen at random to suit the powers that be, we are taught the former because 1 + 1 does equal 2. And when science showed us conclusively the Earth was a sphere, we discarded the old myths and superstitions of the flat Earth, or at least the majority of us did.
Then, around 1514, a man named Copernicus created a new model of the world. He stated that if the Earth was spinning around 1,100 miles an hour and circling the Sun at 60,000 miles an hour, the world was then round. And while the math more or less worked, there was a problem. It was 1500, and the technology to prove such a theory wasn't there. The first balloon to carry people wasn't invented until 1760. Sailboats were the only travel over water, and the fastest thing on land was a horse.
Now, to hear Mark tell it, for no reason other than the fact that nobody could disprove it, the powers that be decided arbitrarily over lunch one day to make the world a globe. And the common folk, the man and woman in the street, much like women will copy the hairstyle of their favorite actress, or men will emulate somebody from the movies, they just followed blindly along with what they were told.
But the new worldview was promoted and took hold. The religions adapted to handle the new reality, and life moved on. More importantly, the globe model was quickly introduced into the education systems. Over the next 500 years, the challenges to this model faded, to the point where the globe was accepted as universally as physical laws such as gravity. Read that again if you didn't absorb it. For 20 generations, people believed that the Earth was round because there was a globe in every classroom they sat in. There was no proof.
Continuing with his two themes, Mark now introduces the truth. After generations of promoting a random model of the globe Earth, man begins to reach for space, and the men in black fear their secret will be revealed. Generations of observations of ships going over the horizon, of the tens and thousands of observations that led Kepler to working out the orbital mechanics, which allow us to plot the future movement of the planets and even predict eclipses of the sun and the moon. Scientific advances of the 18th and 19th centuries, Einstein's theory of relativity, and even the models of the solar system in every classroom will have to be discarded by the great truth discovered in the course of man's quest for space. This threatens those behind the curtain, the powers that secretly control every aspect of our lives. They can't allow their secret to be exposed. Or at least that's what Mark will have you believe.
Hundreds of years went by, and still civilization had no way of proving the theory. Planes were invented around 1900, but until 1957, nothing could go high enough to give a true perspective of where we lived. And that's when everything got strange. The United States and Russia both sent up rockets high enough to take decent pictures, and what they saw scared them a great deal.
And of course, according to Mark, we all know what happens when the powers that be become scared. They lash out. They create conspiracies. They cover up the truth. They hide basic information from regular, everyday folks like you and me.
How do we know they were extremely concerned about the sky? Because the US and Russia immediately started firing nuclear weapons straight up, and they kept firing for the next 4 years. A few things to keep in mind here. First, this was now 1958. Nuclear weapons were very expensive and hard to come by. These also weren't those nominal yield 20 kiloton toys we used on Hiroshima. This was high kiloton to low megaton, and we couldn't get them up fast enough.
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here a little bit and say that I doubt the families and descendants of the approximately 200,000 people that were killed in the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki would appreciate Mark's characterization of those weapons as toys. Atomic weapons of any size are devastating. The weapons used in the atomic bombings of Japan were in the range of 12 to 28 kilotons. Upper atmospheric and low space tests of nuclear weapons in the late 1950s and early 1960s ranged from 1.2 kilotons to 3.4 megatons. They were designed to produce and study electromagnetic pulses to disrupt enemy command and control. Wikipedia talks about a Soviet test on the 22nd of October 1962 during the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. A 300-kiloton warhead was detonated 290 kilometers up. The resulting EMP fused 570 kilometers of overhead telephone line. A current of 2,500 amps was measured before the lines fried. It also set fire to a power plant and shut down a 1,000-kilometer section of power line. Mark's attempt to relate this to early space exploration is also disingenuous. This photograph is from a V-2 rocket shot from White Sands in 1946. We also have this shot from 1948, which clearly demonstrates the curvature of the Earth. These photographs were taken 12 years before the first of these airborne and near-space nuclear tests. If, as Mark suggests, this was a joint effort by the United States and the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War to blow a hole in the dome or whatever it is he is suggesting, it took them 12 years to get around to it, so they didn't seem to be too concerned. It is simply absurd to suggest this, and a baseless conspiracy theory designed to influence people who apparently don't know how to use Google and find this information out for themselves. For the record, it took me less than 5 minutes. But let's return to Mark making his case for the flat Earth.
And the strangeness continued in other places. In 1959, only a year into the atmosphere bombardment, 10 nations, including the United States, made Antarctica off-limits to any colonization. A treaty was put in place and to this day remains intact. Over 50 nations now have signed off on this treaty. Do you know any treaty that has lasted that long between all industrialized nations? Moreover, do you know any piece of real estate in the world that is owned by no one? You would think at the very least one of the large oil companies would use their huge financial resources to explore this region, and yet they don't even petition the idea.
Let's have a word on the Antarctic Treaty. In honor of the International Geophysical Year from 1957 to 58, 12 nations active in and around the Antarctic met in Washington to sign the Antarctic Treaty, preserving the seventh continent for science and conserving it as the last major unspoiled landmass on Earth. This was needed because following World War II, the United States had sent a very large naval task force to Antarctica to conduct testing for military operations in the region. You can look up Operation High Jump. We sent a naval task force, including an aircraft carrier, to operate in the area. Britain and other nations had also sent military exercises in the Antarctic. Germany had attempted to conduct offensive military operations in the seas around Antarctica during World War II. Antarctica continues to have military importance, but more importantly are the resources and minerals below the continent. The Antarctic Treaty, which went into effect in 1961, protects the region from exploitation and makes it available to all nations. Despite the fact that the Antarctic Treaty was signed to preserve the continent for science, tourists can and do regularly pay $30,000 to go to the pole. There are regular sightseeing flights that leave Perth, Australia. Greater Sapien, a prominent YouTube creator, took one such flight last month in his recent trip to Australia and South Africa. Be sure to check out his upcoming special. But more on that later.
The short version of the discovery is this. By 1958, the military had discovered the very solid upper and outer edges of our world, and had to create a way to put up do not enter signs without looking obvious. It was tricky, but if there is one thing I have learned about the authority, it's that nothing is left to chance. Most of the work had already been done for them, so their job was primarily in the details. The sky part of the dome was much higher than commercial air traffic, so the only thing they had to worry about there was the space program, which is immediately militarized. The outer border had the natural benefit of not only an extensive ocean, but a scaling decrease in temperature and a steady increase in iceberg frequency to discourage ships all leading to a permanently frozen landmass that could not be used for any form of agriculture. This ocean and ice layout had worked well for thousands of years because the technology of the current civilization didn't evolve quickly. Sailors avoided cold weather seas whenever possible, and oxygen levels get low enough to harm people, even on high mountains.
Well, unfortunately for this tidy narrative, SpaceX, which is a private corporation, regularly launches rockets into orbit with nary a uniform in sight. Virgin Galactic will start suborbital tourism within the next couple of years after a series of successful tests of their privately owned manned rockets. Mark, cool story, bro. Tell us another.
The brilliance of the design comes in the simple fact that human males are corrupted by power. Corruption so total, in fact, that they would rather hide the world itself rather than risk their power on it. You could theorize that kings and popes were told of the world a long time ago. Maybe an ancient scroll or book. Perhaps an interdimensional being told the tale of what the world looked like.
Well, you might be onto something, but I think I found him.
But this was all but dismissed because even the most powerful leaders of the day couldn't reach the borders. And if they couldn't, what chance did the general public have? It's one thing to be told of the giant impenetrable dome, but it's a whole different animal when you finally stand right next to it. Then the tough decisions have to be made. Do we keep the secret? And how far are we willing to go to keep the status quo?
Well, now it's time to go full conspiracy. Never go full conspiracy. Now, Mark will tell us how thousands of pilots, military people of all ranks, politicians, and celebrities will fight the urge to pull a Snowden and cash in on their secrets concerning fake satellites, large-scale military operations to guard the dome, construction of ground-based GPS systems, spraying chemtrails, putting God knows what in vaccines, and on and on and on and on.
Once they decided to keep the secret, no expense was spared. The rapid progression of rocketry science had to be addressed quickly, and so the moon missions were created. Matt from the NASA channel was right in his thinking that you needed the moon mission event to stage a picture of the Earth from deep orbit, and that couldn't be more true. Establishing NASA as the frontrunner of space exploration also diverted people who would have otherwise created their own space companies for profit.
What, you mean like these guys?
The best engineers, technicians, and pilots were recruited to the NASA space program. Once there, they were compartmentalized on a need-to-know basis. The astronauts know of the deception and are sworn to secrecy under the penalty of whatever motivates them. Private space programs are discouraged, sabotaged, or absorbed into the NASA fold. Private sector spacecraft are just not going to be allowed for several reasons. The most obvious is the collision with the dome itself. The telemetry data from such a mission would show an impact failure at a certain altitude, and if repeated, would raise questions NASA just isn't prepared to answer.
Well, I'd start getting a little concerned because Ragical's giving you the eye. And I hear he's got a new development, an intercontinental facepalm missile.
There are three perpetual questions about our world that can't be eliminated, but avoided at all costs. These are the questions you should ask yourself and others if this protective layer is going to be lifted. I'd like to preface this with a thank you to Max Malone, a conspiracy hardcore who has a knack for boiling down debates to a single paragraph whenever possible. It was he who said, after over 50 years and thousands of hours of space travel footage, both by NASA and other countries, there is no exterior shot where the astronaut completes the simple act of panning the camera 180 degrees, let alone a full 360-degree sweep. This has never happened on any moon mission, exterior space station, nothing, ever. Statistics will tell you that this would have already happened by accident years ago, but it hasn't, and it won't. This is because of the rule they cannot break. The same rule that applies to television set shows that never show the fourth wall. Why? Because there is no fourth wall. Number 2. When you search online for pictures of the Earth from space, 95% of what you will see is a collection of artificial composite shots. In 2000, when I did this search, there was exactly one picture by NASA showing the bottom part of Africa and Antarctica. Now that picture is hidden within hundreds of simulated images. There are HD cameras everywhere, and no one is taking a shot of the Earth, because you can't get enough altitude to do it. Number 3. The commercial air travel routes for the southern hemisphere are wrong. This is an easy thing you can check out in 60 seconds. Take a map reading of the distance between anywhere near Australia and anywhere in South America. It's a straight shot across the South Pacific. Now find your favorite travel site and try to get there non-stop. See what happens. The routes start turning ridiculous. I used to business travel for years, and I've never seen anything like it. It's the one thing in the general public world they can't hide, the actual distance between these two places. On a round world, the flight is easy, just a straight shot across an ocean. But on a flat world, it becomes the greatest distance between 2 points. There are no shortcuts, so they distract you with multiple connections and layovers. It's only blind luck that the United States was in the northern hemisphere. Otherwise, the increased traffic would have raised eyebrows by now.
Well, Mark, let's take a shot at your 3 questions. The first one, why hasn't NASA taken a 360 panoramic around the space station? Well, I think this is probably because placating conspiracy theorists is not high on their to-do list. There are feeds and photos and videos and film camera shots of folks in space all over the internet. Why don't you take a break from watching flat Earth videos for a moment and go look at them? Next, seriously, you think every single photo from space is a composite or a Photoshop? Well, first of all, composites are photos. There's nothing wrong with composites. There's nothing abnormal about them. Many photos are composites. Second of all, there are just oodles and oodles of photographs from space, from film cameras, as I mentioned. So, unless you are willing to do photo forensics on the literally millions of photos and videos from space, I just don't buy your assertion that every single one of them is fake sight unseen. It's not logical. Now, the best one I save for last, and that is the lack of air routes in the southern hemisphere. Well, first of all, Greater Sapien just flew from Sydney, Australia to Johannesburg, South Africa as a part of his upcoming special. He had GPS locations and video of the entire flight from start to finish. It was a direct flight through the southern hemisphere, non-stop. There are a number of these flights. 2 that come to mind right off the top of my head are the regularly scheduled flights from Sydney, Australia to Santiago, Chile, and of course Greater Sapien's flight to Johannesburg. You may wonder why I'm using your photo of this question. It's because ironically, your photo of the air routes clearly shows flights across the southern hemisphere. Do you even look at your material before you put it up and disprove your own points? Or Mark, are you, as I suspect, a Poe, just preying on people that are too gullible to even look themselves at your own photo? I do suspect that is the case because you've gotten over 1 million views on this video alone.
I know. It's madness. It's lunacy. There are people who will tell you straight to your face that all the leaders of the world are lizards, and yet these people laugh out loud when you say the words flat Earth. I was, and still am, a huge conspiracy guy. I literally ran out of new tin hat topics to research.
You nearly ran out of tin hat topics to research. Do you realize how telling that is about you and your fellow flat earthers? Do you?
I literally ran out of new tin hat topics to research, and I still wouldn't look at this one without embarrassment. But every time I glanced at it, there was something unresolved. And once I saw the near perfection of the whole plan, I was hooked. Do your own homework. Ask the questions. Get past the possibility and see if you can move into an even bigger picture, like who built the dome and why. That's where it starts to get really interesting, and things start opening up. I know I said years ago that the greater good was something that should be preserved, that JFK, Pearl Harbor, and 9/11 were inevitable. I still believe it, and I understand the decisions. The globe illusion, however, has run its course over the last 500 years. It's time to start again. If that means we end up getting the attention of who or what created this place and force the reset of the world, is that such a bad thing? I'm not allowing ratings or comments on this video for several reasons. One, this topic seems to bring out the worst debates because of the initial denial. That, and I've seen dedicated trolls on the Flat Earth Society website who show up every day and say the same thing to new forum members. It's a joke. It's not serious. Nothing to see here. Kind of strange that there are full-time trolls on a site that has less than 500 members worldwide.
This rabbit hole's too deep for me.